Alright, I am going to demonstrate the procedures for testing an RP using the USC 10th edition procedures. So I'm going to be using a Midwest 5-valve test kit. I am going to need all the hoses. I don't need the compensating valve, so I might as well get rid of the compensating valve. I am going to get set up though by connecting my hoses to the test kit. Make sure I have that all done. So I will need all 3 hoses. Double check everything's closed. Alright, so now I've got my test kit ready. So now I'm going to test the RP by notifying the owner. I'm going to identify, inspect, and observe. On the RP, again, there's a tag on it that says RP. There's a direction of flow arrow on it, tells me direction of flow. I can also identify the RP because it has a relief valve on the bottom of it. You do want to be careful because sometimes people mistake the double check valve for the RP or the RP for the double check valve. They look very similar. You want to make sure you got the RP. So this is my RP, direction of flows that way, shut off valve number 1, shut off valve number 2, test cock number 1, test cock number 2, test cock number 3, test cock number 4. Now with the RP, there's a very specific order in which you have to flush the test cocks. The order is meant to keep you from prematurely making the relief valve open up. And to do that, what we do is we get flow going through the assembly by the first test cock we open is test cock number 4. So you want to open it, flush it good, and then you can turn it down a little bit so it doesn't have to be full bore. Alright, then I'm going to slowly open up test cock number 3. Again, you're trying not to dump the relief valve, so I'm going to slowly open up test cock number 3. And again, I'm going to leave it running. Again, I'm going to slowly open up test cock number 2. Alright, I'm going to leave it running. I'm going to open up test cock number 1. Alright, once you flush test cock number 1, you're going to close the test cocks in the reverse order. So I'm going to close test cock number 1. I'm going to close test cock number 2. I'm going to close test cock number 3, and I'm going to close test cock number 4. Next, I'm going to hook my high side hose up to test cock number 2, and I'm going to hook my low side hose up to test cock number 3. Make sure everything's turned off. I'm going to open up, and again, this is very important, the order. You open up the low side hose, or you open up test cock number 3 first, and you get water purged out of there. And in this case, I'm purging a bunch of air out of the hose and the test kit, so it takes a little bit. Alright, now because we're doing the low side, notice the gauge doesn't go up. because on the back side of this, what you're doing is you're putting water on this side, which actually drives the gauge down. All right, so I leave that on. I leave my my low vent control valve open. I'm going to open up test cock number 2, and this will cause the gauge to go up. All right. I'm going to open up my high bleed valve. All right, make sure I get all the air out of it. Let it run for a little bit. I'm going to close my high bleed valve. Make sure that drives my gauge up to the upper end. And then I'm going to, I'm going to back up here a little bit. So now that I've got them both going, I've reopened up my high side bleed valve. With both of them open, I need to reach down and close shutoff valve number 2. Once I close shutoff valve number 2, then I close my high bleed valve. Make sure it's driven the gauge up to the high end. Close my low bleed valve and wait for it to settle and observe the reading. And this is my apparent differential cross check valve number 1. So I look at it, it's like, it's 10 psi. Okay. What this is telling me is that check valve number 1 is working. I don't know for sure if that's the right reading. That's why they call it apparent. And you'll understand later on when we show the diagnostics. So what this is really telling me is that, yeah, check valve number 1 is reading. I can now continue on to test the relief valve opening point. Now, the relief valve opening point needs to be 2 psi or greater. That's the minimum. It's 2 psi. So the way I'm going to test the relief valve opening point is I am going to bleed water from the high side to the low side by manipulating the control valves on the bottom of the test kit. So this is my high side control valve. I'm going to open it approximately a turn, and then I'm going to open up my low side control valve no more than a quarter turn. In most cases, you don't even need to open it a quarter turn. You just need to open it a little bit so that the gauge starts to move like that. Like I've barely opened it any there. I'm going to put my hand underneath the relief valve so that I can observe the gauge. I'm waiting to feel the relief valve open and drip on my hand. So it started dripping now, it's continuing to drip, and I'm at 4.4 psid. You do want to be careful that it's not just a drip coming off the body, so you want it to be more than one drip. So my relief valve is opened at 4.4 psid. In which case I'm going to close the low control valve, leave the high control valve open. I'm going to take my vent hose here. I'm going to open the vent control valve and purge my vent hose of air. Once I purge it of air, I'm going to immediately hook my vent hose onto test cock number 4. And it's also very important that you immediately open test cock number 4. Okay. I'm going to reestablish the differential by opening up my low bleed. And you need to open the low bleed so that the gauge goes up towards the top. Technically, it has to just go above your apparent reading. So I'm going to make sure that I'm back above the apparent reading. I'm going to open up my vent control knob by opening up this yellow knob. And I'm going to observe what happens. My gauge holds tight, doesn't move, relief valve doesn't open. That tells me that check valve number 2 closes tight. The gauge is actually still reading the pressure differential across check valve number 1. So it's not actually giving you any kind of reading across check valve number 2. It's just telling you that check valve number 2 holds tight. This seems a little bit odd, but the next thing you do is you're going to open your low control valve to reestablish your differential, let your gauge settle, and then this is the true reading across check valve number 1. And in with this case, it's 9.7 PSID. So it's a little bit different than my apparent, but not a whole lot different. So check valve holds tight at 9.7 PSID. Check valve 1 holds tight at 9.7 PSID. Next, I can set down the gauge. However, it is very important that you close all the test cocks before you open up shutoff valve number 2. So I'm going to close all my test cocks. I'm going to slowly open up shutoff valve number 2 to get my customer back in service. And then I'm going to remove the hoses from my RP. Alright, I'm going to notify the owner that I'm done. I'm going to fill out a test report completely accurately and legibly. And that concludes my test of the RP assembly.